As we turn now to some of the other stories we're following in the Bloomberg Power Brief. Thousands of people paid their respects to late Minnesota House Speaker Melissa Hortman and her husband Mark today at the state capitol, where the couple are lying in state. Hortman served in the Minnesota House for 11 terms, including 6 years as Speaker. She and her husband were assassinated in their home June 14th, and a suspect was arrested after a 36-hour manhunt. A private funeral is set for tomorrow morning. Among those who will attend that service, former Vice President Kamala Harris.
California Governor Gavin Newsom is taking on Fox News in a $787 million defamation suit. According to the lawsuit, Fox News host Jesse Waters claimed Newsom lied about phone calls between Newsom and Trump during their dispute over the deployment of the National Guard and supported the falsehood with deceptively edited video. Newsom said he would drop the suit if Fox News issues a formal retraction and on-air apology. Fox News, of course, settled a separate defamation suit with Dominion Voting Systems in 2023 for a similar amount.
And University of Virginia President James Ryan is resigning as part of an effort to resolve a Justice Department investigation into the school's diversity practices. This week, the New York Times reported Trump administration officials have been pressuring the school to take action after multiple reports of race-based treatment on campus, including the use of race in admissions considerations. Ryan released a letter to the university community today, writing, "I cannot make a unilateral decision to fight the federal government in order to save my own job." Now we turn back to Capitol Hill on Balance of Power. Republican senators are sprinting to get this tax bill through before the July 4 deadline. As we've been discussing throughout the hour, we now play it to the panel as the president's one big beautiful bill hangs in the balance in the United States Senate. Bloomberg Politics contributors Rick Davis, partner at Stone Court Capital, and Republican strategist and Democratic analyst Jeannie Shanzano, political science professor at Iona University, join us together. Great to see you both. That means we made it to Friday. Rick, you spent enough time in the Senate to have a sense of what's percolating behind the scenes here. This last-minute fit of deal-making with SALT, still trying to figure out exactly what the parliamentarians' last word means. We're almost there.
Yeah, I think it's probably less parliamentarian focus now, and all the individual deals that all these members are trying to get into that budget package being put together right now by Lindsey Graham, chairman of the Budget Committee. It's a mad scramble, and that's part of the dance, the ballet of the Senate. Everyone's trying to figure out, when is Thune going to call for a motion to proceed? Do we have a bill that we can circulate tonight so that people can read it? This will be 1,000 pages, so that's a little bit deceptive, but and get to a vote either tomorrow or Sunday, and that starts the clock on the vote-a-rama.
Will he call, though, a vote if he's not sure he actually has the votes to pass this thing? Because we know in the House, Mike Johnson is very willing to let something publicly fail, but is John Thune? Yeah,
I think Thune is ready to sort of get this show on the road, and so if they have a problem with the motion to proceed, it's not going to kill anything, right? Then they take a step back and say, okay, who didn't walk the plank? Why are we not getting to the 51 votes we needed for the motion to proceed? And then, find out what deals need to be cut in order to get to the second one. So motions to proceed sometimes fail. That wouldn't be a surprise to most people.
Yeah. All right, Jeannie, so what's this vote-a-rama going to look like? Democrats have been picking their battles here. You're going to keep us all night? What will be the objection?
Yeah, they'll try to keep it as long as possible. You talked to Dick Durbin today. They've got a lot of issues that they want to force Republicans to take a vote on. And, I think in the end, though, this does get through. It's always, I think, a telling sign when we hear that President Trump is not going to play golf this weekend. He's going to stay in D.C. That means the closer is here. They're talking about a big, beautiful barbecue for the 4th of July. So I think they'd really like to push this through if they can. I think it's still tight, but I heard John Thune called Saturday vote an aspirational, so maybe they get Sunday, then the 72 hours, and they try to push this thing through to the House before the 4th.
Well, of course, the president's pushing against this July 4th deadline, but he also is looking at a deadline that he suggested today is potentially movable of July 9th when it comes to negotiating with our trading partners to avoid higher tariffs being put back into place. Although if you're Canada, apparently you're just going to find out what your tariff rate is in 7 days. As the president suggested, a digital services tax means trade talks are over, and he talked about it at the White House earlier.
Canada's been a very difficult country to deal with over the years. We hear Canada, we have a great relationship with the people of Canada, but it's been very difficult. And they put a charged, and they were a little bit early. We found out about it. So, and we have all the cards. We have every single one. We don't want to do anything bad, but they have economically, we have such power over Canada.
Jeannie, how do we tell if this particular threat against Canada is just an empty one meant to further his efforts in negotiations, or if it's real this time? Because there is a pattern here.
There is a pattern. I don't think we know. I have to say that's probably the first time I've ever heard anybody say Canadians are hard to deal with. Usually we think the opposite, as I do. And it's fascinating because, you know, he is no fan of the former prime minister, but the current prime minister, they seem to have a very good rapport in his business and background. Who'd have thought it would end up like this? But I think with Donald Trump, there's always room to maneuver. So I think there is a possibility he goes back on this. But none of this seems to have impacted the market in any way but positive. And so for all the scuttlebutt about Canada, it seems like the market hasn't really seemed to mind that much.
It's true, Rick. The S&P 500 at a new all-time high today, all-time closing high here. Are we really about to do this all over again? July 9th is creeping up, and we could be talking about reciprocal tariffs on a lot of countries.
Yeah, I mean, the president said everyone's going to be getting a letter. Yeah. You know, the love letters from Donald Trump, and all they have to do is agree. I mean, so, you know, we see his negotiating style, right? You know, here's the gun, now agree. I like to call him the dealer now, not the closer, because everybody seems to not have the cards they need. He's the only one. Wow. And so, yeah, I think in this, the public has kind of gotten used to it, right? We barely even have a ripple when it comes to, we're cutting off negotiations with our northern partner. You would have thought that would affect the markets and public opinion. Yeah. Not so much these days. So it's really his game to play. And I think these reciprocal tariffs will go into effect. I mean, who knows? They may get delayed a little bit, but they will ultimately go into effect. And all he'll talk about is the incredible amounts of cash that are making America rich again. Yeah.
Well, yeah, and I wonder if he'll start talking a little more about the stock market, because it wasn't all too long ago, Jeannie, that he was suggesting it was still the Biden stock market, not his. With stocks at a record, is it Donald Trump's now?
It's his now, Kaylee. When it goes up, it's his. When it goes down, it's probably Joe Biden's. And, of course, this is the same president talking about the big, beautiful bill and the fact if the Democrats don't vote for it, they're voting to raise taxes. He doesn't say the same thing about tariffs that he's imposing, which are taxes on the American public. But that message he seems to leave aside, and to Rick's point, talk about all the cash that's coming in.
Also, what do you make of this? Why are we so desensitized? Are we just, this is the second 100 days phenomenon, or is this the taco trade?
Yeah, I think that there's a little bit of taco trade here. But look, the American public, when you ask them this question of, like, how do you feel about how things are going, they don't look like the stock market, right? Yeah. They are, like, kind of, you know, miserable about the fact that the economy's not doing well. When you look at comparisons to this 4th of July and last 4th of July, the cost of hot dogs, the cost of buns, the cost of mustard, what else does anybody eat on 4th of July, is all higher than it was a year ago. And so, you know, I know that's just a metaphor for what condition people are in, but Donald Trump has the lowest approval rating of the modern presidency when it comes to the economy, and that's comparing him to Joe Biden and Bidenomics, which wasn't a very good sell.
Well, and you wonder why the president said today that he is looking for a Fed chair next that's going to be willing to cut rates, as he continually berates Chairman Powell, though he says for now that's more about interest costs for the U.S. Debt than it is about the economy. But Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano, as always, our political panel, thank you so much for joining us. And, of course, you can get coverage of everything we just discussed with Rick and Jeannie in the Washington Edition newsletter, on the Terminal, and online.
That big, beautiful barbecue sounding pretty good for the weekend. Thanks for joining us on Balance of Power. Thanks to our panel, and have a great weekend. We'll see you back here on Bloomberg TV and radio.
Africa, a region rife with potential for growth and opportunities, but not without its challenges. Bloomberg highlights the biggest stories, interviewing key players, and reporting on the issues impacting the region. Join us as we get to the heart of African business, politics, and economics, and ask the question, what's next? I'm Jennifer Zabasaja, and this is Next Africa.
New episodes every month, only on Bloomberg.
DraftKings hit a milestone in the second quarter of 2024. For the first time as a public company, it turned a profit.
Is this a new era for DraftKings?
There's an inflection from when you're cash flow negative and you're operating off of equity raises from the past to when you're self-funded and you're cash flow positive and able to control your destiny a lot more.
You've had your first quarters of profitability now. Does that take pressure off? Does it increase pressure?
I think it increases pressure. I mean, once you start making profits, people expect you to make more, and all of a sudden you're valued on a multiple of those profits as opposed to the theoretical what could be. So very important, I think.
When you're cash flow negative, you've sold a vision of what the company should be working on, and you're very focused on working on that and delivering against that. When you've pivoted to profitability, the world of what you can work on is a little bit open, and there's a lot of different ideas, and it requires more focus than ever to make sure that you are prioritizing on the most important things that are going to deliver the most value.
DraftKings' solid standing in a booming sector gives them the luxury to play the long game. They're not under pressure to cut costs.
When you have really strong revenue growth, you don't need that. If you look at where we are today and where we want to be and where we believe we will be, the vast majority of the incremental EBITDA is not coming from any cost reduction. It's coming from increased revenue.
We don't feel like we need to cut costs because we're growing our revenue so much. We want to grow our revenue into our existing cost structure, and there's no need to reduce the cost as long as we're being efficient with what we allow our cost growth to look like.
It's the world's second largest economy with a growing influence in global affairs. Bloomberg The China Show brings you the unmatched expertise you need to keep track of breaking news, in-depth market analysis, and the most influential newsmakers in and around China.
We need to do more to engage the market more. We're risk on. I think we caught a little sweet spot.
Massive savings right now.
It's already a different game.
Bloomberg The China Show. Weekdays at 9 p.m. Eastern Time, right here on Bloomberg. Context changes everything.
In case you missed it, on Bloomberg Crypto.
How do you expect the asset to continue price increase at these levels that we've seen? And at what point do we see, winter coming again?
Winter's not coming back. We're past that phase. If Bitcoin's not going to zero, it's going to $1 million. And you have all the evidence you need to determine that, right? The President of the United States has determined he supports Bitcoin. The Cabinet supports Bitcoin. Scott Bessent supports Bitcoin. Paul Atkins has shown himself to be an enthusiastic believer of Bitcoin and digital assets. Ken Taz at CFTC feels the same way. The banks are going to custody Bitcoin. Bitcoin has gotten through its riskiest period. The accounting has been corrected. There's now only 450 Bitcoin a day available for sale by natural sellers.
Don't miss Bloomberg Crypto live Tuesdays.
Get your fixed income fix. Watch Bloomberg Real Yield every Friday at 12 p.m. Eastern, right here on Bloomberg. Context changes everything.
This is Wall Street Week. I'm David Weston, bringing you stories of capitalism. July 4 looms as the deadline for the One Big Beautiful Bill, and Republicans are accusing the Congressional Budget Office of overstating the price tag. We tell you the story of the CBO, where it came from, and how well it's done at predicting costs and benefits. Plus, President Trump wants to help relieve some of the debt burden by selling U.S. residency through what he calls a gold card. It turns out that an awful lot of other countries have similar programs with mixed results. And the stark economic choice New York City voters faced at the polls this week. What Zohran Mamdani's Democratic primary win could mean for the home of Wall Street. But we start with a story that dominated the news for much of the week.
The U.S. military carried out massive precision strikes on the 3 key nuclear facilities.
Your bold decision to target Iran's nuclear facilities with the awesome and righteous might of the United States will change history.
The world must not forget that it was the United States which, in the midst of a process to forge a diplomatic outcome, betrayed diplomacy.
Just in the last few seconds or so, we're getting President Trump announcing a 12-hour ceasefire between Iran and Israel.
We basically have two countries that have been fighting so long and so hard that they don't know what the they're doing.
Are you interested in restarting negotiations with Iran? And if so, have they responded?
So our people, Marco could answer this, but our people are not, I'm not. The way I look at it, They fought, the war's done, and, you know, I could get a statement that they're not going to go nuclear. We're probably going to ask for that, but they're not going to be doing it. But they're not going to be doing it anyway. They've had it. They've had it.
Whether or not Iran has had it, the question remains how the conflict reshaped the landscape of politics and markets in the Middle East. To help us find an answer, we spoke with Karen Young, Senior Fellow at the Middle East Institute in Washington.
I think we are in the midst of some major transition in the region. We don't know in which directions, at what speed it will go. But I think mainly this is a transition that will have to happen inside of Iran. The government and the security apparatus is extremely weakened. They've been delegitimized in the eyes of their own people in terms of their ability to defend them. The president of Iran had to ask for Israel's permission to fly out of the country. That just gives you a little bit of a picture of the control that the IDF had over Iran's airspace. And we don't know right now the extent of, where the highly enriched uranium that Iran has stockpiled, where it is.
One of the big stories has been the Gulf states, Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states, and the investment into their economic development. What possible ramifications could what we've seen in Israel, Iran, and with the United States have on Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states?
So the economic transformation that's happening in Saudi Arabia really since Mohammed bin Salman and his father King Salman came to power in 2015 has been this idea of Vision 2030, of opening up the economy, trying to increase foreign direct investment, encouraging women's participation in the economy, and opening up new sectors, particularly tourism, as well as new energy, renewables, perhaps green hydrogen, a whole lot of sports investment, entertainment. None of those things work if we see a region where there are ballistic missiles falling from the sky. So the missiles that Iran sent into Doha to hit the Al Udeid base as a retaliation against the United States, I think for the entire Gulf Cooperation Council was a moment of real terror and fear, even though it was pre-communicated and was not targeting the Qataris, themselves. It's just not something that goes along with having the World Cup or having major tourist destinations. That will sit in people's memories for a long time.
Investors like stability, predictability. There has been a lot of instability because of the relationship between Israel and Iran, fear of Iran developing nuclear weapons. What are the prospects that actually, over the longer term, this will bring stability to the region rather than instability to the region, if in fact Iran is substantially weakened?
Iran is weakened, but Iran can still lash out, and that's why the location and the state of their stockpile, almost 900 pounds of highly enriched uranium, we need to know where it is, and we need to know it's in safe hands. More and more, Iran now has a motive to weaponize, which maybe they truly did not have before.
And finally, we don't know, as you said, exactly how this will play out in Iran, but it seems like one possibility is some turmoil within Iran about leadership. There's a lot of speculation about that. If, in fact, there is that turmoil and it's not clear who's in charge for some protracted period of time, what does that mean for the region?
I think that's the worst case scenario for the region, particularly if we get rival military factions or breakoffs from the IRGC, competing commanders, so to speak. We're definitely not there yet. There is still very much a command and control system still in place in Iran. We have the supreme leader, we have the clerical leadership, we have the elected leadership, and we have the military leadership. And those are still intact, though, particularly within the IRGC commanders and the military structure. They have been decimated. There have been a lot of people killed, but they're still very much in control of their armed forces. So do we see factions breaking off? Do we see some, sort of exiting the country and taking riches with them or taking materials with them and living to fight another day, forming up with militias in Iraq, trying to enter into Syria and destabilize Syria further? I think those are all possibilities that we have to consider.
Unless you're a defense contractor, war is never good for business. But what President Trump calls his 12-day war involving Israel, Iran, and ultimately the United States had remarkable little effect on markets apart from a short-term spike in oil prices. We asked our special contributor, Larry Summers of Harvard, why?
David, it's something I've noticed over long periods of time. Geopolitics are much less significant for markets than geopolitical people think that they should be, whether it's events in the Taiwan Straits or events with respect to North Korea and what happens in South Korea. Markets kind of have a life of their own, driven by longer-term assessments and less responsive to even very dramatic short-term events. So I think this is just something we should all be used to. It's a version of my observation about events ultimately being less important than trends. I think on top of that, you have the reality that it sure doesn't look like oil is as important to the global economy as it used to be, that imported oil is much less important to the U.S. economy than it used to be. And there's a sense that there's some excess capacity around, particularly in Saudi Arabia, that might cover any sets of gaps. So I think it's all of that. It's also the fact that a larger fraction of the market is tech stocks than once used to be the case, and they are relatively impervious to these developments.
One of the long-term trends that may happen, we have one data point or two at this point, but one trend is somewhat more assertive the United States, more than we thought originally with President Trump, with his getting involved in Iran, even the visit to NATO, and his apparent shift in his position. If, in fact, the United States is relatively more assertive on the international stage rather than less, does that have potential ramifications for economics as well as for markets?
I mean, it depends on what the form that U.S. assertiveness takes. I had been concerned about a growing U.S. isolationism, that an outward-looking United States could be a very important stabilizing force in the world, and I continue to believe that. So I think a sense of the U.S. as being willing to be a security guarantor is a potentially significant positive.
Coming up, everybody likes to complain about Congressional Budget Office estimates of the costs and benefits of big legislation. We take a look at its track record.
Technology is embedded in every aspect of our lives.
And laying the foundation for the future.
From finance to defense, AI to entertainment.
And from the road to the stars. Bloomberg brings you the latest stories of the people and companies pushing the tech sector to new frontiers.
And the politics that shape global tech markets.
I'm Caroline Hyde in New York.
And I'm Ed Ludlow in San Francisco.
Watch Bloomberg Tech every weekday.
Only on Bloomberg Television.
In case you missed it on Bloomberg Insight.
I just think there's a chance that you'll have stagflation. I'm not saying it's going to happen. I don't want the reader to say he's predicting. I'm not.
But we have to be prepared for something like that. I think the global fiscal deficits are inflationary. I think the remilitarization of the world is inflationary. The restructuring of trade is inflationary. And this is not all an American thing. You know, with all those things taking place, yeah, you may be surprised.
I spoke to Jamie Dimon. He says that we should actually prepare for stagflation. How do you square that?
I think there's no question that the shock of tariffs are stagflationary. The question is going to be ultimately how high do they settle at? Right now they're at a very high level, highest in 100 years. And how long a period both is this uncertain environment and how long are the tariffs going to last? And the question now is the magnitude of the stagflationary impulse, and we just don't know yet.
Don't miss Bloomberg Insight live weekdays.
Making money isn't about drowning in emotions. It's about understanding what's actually happening. Markets are the best way to glean signal from noise, and that is what we try to do every morning. This is Bloomberg Surveillance.
It's Jobs Day, and Bloomberg has the report under surveillance.
There is this feeling the labor market is contracting.
There's some risk that layoffs are growing.
Medium-term outlook is the economy should be fine.
This Thursday, Jonathan, Lisa, Anne-Marie, and Mike will bring you crucial data and expert analysis at terminal speed.
The weakening trend continues.
This is a trend. We're seeing declines.
If you're not with a job right now, it's harder to find a new one.
The June Jobs Report, Thursday on Bloomberg.
This is a story about trust. Trust that Congress has some sense of the consequences of major economic legislation before it votes on it. In the United States, a statute puts that trust in the Congressional Budget Office. Bloomberg economics editor Michael McKee brings us the tale of the CBO and its track record in making those predictions.
Sometimes our numbers are welcome, and sometimes they're inconvenient.
Philip Swagel has helmed the Congressional Budget Office since 2019, after stints at the U.S. Treasury Department under President George W. Bush during the financial crisis, and teaching international economic policy at the University of Maryland. The fact is, a lot of his job and methods are not up to him. They're dictated by legislation, including the Congressional Budget Act of 1974.
The cost estimates we do of legislation are based on the legislative text, and they're measured against current law. So, for example, the reconciliation legislation that we're evaluating now, we evaluate that against current law, in which there's certain provisions of the 2017 Tax Act that expire, and that's by statute. And we understand that some policymakers prefer to look at it on a current policy basis. Their view is that they meant for the 2017 Tax Act to continue, to be permanent, and they'd like to evaluate the cost against that baseline. And that's a legitimate way to look at it, and we can provide that information if they want. It's just not the standard way that we do things.
The history of the CBO is it was born out of this growth of peacetime deficits that happened in the 1970s. And the reason why that is relevant is what CBO is sort of statutorily required to do, what it was created to do, is to provide these cost estimates to policymakers about the likely impacts of different policy proposals on what the budgetary outlook is going to look like for the country. And so the precise mechanics of how they do that, do they give you a one-year cost estimate or what is now convention, a sort of 10-year budget window horizon, that's changed over time. But the idea of setting up this organization and kind of empowering them to do the important work of being able to keep score about what deficits are going to look like because of choices that federal policymakers are making is something that is very much in keeping with what their mission is.
Once the CBO gets the best grip it can on the country's costs and tax policies, it has to do the math on future estimates, and not just once. There are two other important concepts here, static and dynamic.
No, that's right. So the static estimate, or we sometimes call it the conventional estimate, assumes that the economy is not affected by legislation. So, for example, there's a big tax component of the reconciliation legislation being considered now, and it's big enough that one would expect the tax cut to affect the economy. We think it would lead to a larger economy with more people working. By convention, that's not in our static estimate. And that's what we've already put out. But now we're working on a dynamic estimate in which we look at the legislation, we look at the effect on the economy, and then we look at the feedback from the change in the economy back to the budget. And so that provides more information. It just takes longer for us to do.
It's where CBO scoring meets legislation that things get especially tricky. First, because predicting America's economic future a decade in advance is just plain hard.
In theory, I'm just going to raise the tax rate by 1 percentage point, and I'm going to have the impact at least in 1 year. I'll then scale it by 10, and that'll tell me what the budget window looks like. Even something that seems that easy is actually more complicated. People are going to make different choices about the extent to which they decide to participate in the labor force and accumulate labor income as a result of that tax shift. They might also make different choices, particularly in industries like in finance, where you can be in an industry where you might receive carried interest instead of receiving labor market income that has a different tax treatment.
I think that.
And so these scorekeepers have like a really difficult task before them as they try to do this type of analysis, and that is a super difficult task to do when they're trying to work as quickly as they are, just given the speed at which things like the reconciliation process invariably are moving.
Forecasting economic outcomes is hard enough in the most stable times, but then, of course, there's responding to politics.
Any bill that's marked up by a committee, we produce a cost estimate. That's by statute. Then there's reports that are requested of us. For example, earlier this month in June, we provided policymakers with information on the revenues raised by the tariffs that President Trump has put in place since his inauguration of his second term. That was requested by a group of senators.
Well, sometimes it seems the requests you get come with a political bias. What do you do then?
That is just part of life in Washington, and we are here to support members. We have no opinion on what the right legislation is. We're just trying to give them the analysis. We're focused on the legislation. So anything within the four corners of the legislative text, that we evaluate. But of course, the president is doing many other things. He's changed tariffs, and that raises a considerable amount of revenue. He's changed immigration in the United States, and he's changing regulations and other aspects of the economy. We will eventually provide information on the economic and budgetary impacts of those. It's not part of our evaluation of the reconciliation legislation. I just saw the New York Times, the Washington Post, all have articles making use of that distributional analysis, which of course the members of Congress who asked us the question understood that it would get that kind of attention.
An important thing to understand, and something that I've observed as I've watched not just this reconciliation debate play out, but this kind of tenor always takes place when CBO is producing estimates of legislation. There are totally understandable critiques that come, and totally understandable frustrations with where CBO lands. And that's not a partisan thing. It happens. Democrats have frustrations, Republicans have frustrations. The thing that people sometimes miss, though, is that a lot of the choices that CBO is making that are being critiqued aren't actually choices that they have any control over. So in the context of this legislation, something like having the baseline that they're measuring against be what is current law, which is that the Trump tax cuts are slated to expire at the end of the year, and so their extension is judged against that expiration. That's not a choice CBO is making. That's something that they are sort of mandated to do.
Okay.
As Yogi Berra said, making predictions is hard, especially about the future. The administration has strongly criticized CBO for underestimating growth in 2022 when it analyzed the 2017 Tax Cut and Jobs Act.
When I look at our performance, I try to understand the context of the performance, and that one soundbite, it's sometimes the $1.5 trillion miss, I feel like that's deeply misleading, because it's almost as if someone who says that is implying that somehow the 2017 Tax Act is what caused the high inflation or what caused the immigration surge. And obviously, that's not plausible. And so I just don't think it's fair to think that CBO in 2018 could have predicted the pandemic, the inflation, the immigration, QE, and all that.
Do you get mad when members of Congress use the CBO as the whipping boy?
No, I don't. I certainly don't get mad. I understand it. I understand the political process. CBO is next to the political process. We're not part of it, but we certainly understand it.
You have something like 270 analysts here working for you. How do they feel about the criticism they get?
No one likes to be criticized. No one likes the White House press secretary attacking you or the president on Truth Social, but that is part of the political process.
Has this been sort of an unusually chaotic period? I can just imagine the guys who are working on tariffs doing all their math and coming up with a number, and then the president changes his mind.
The tariffs has been an area of policy that is just changing, and we do our best to keep up with it. Members of Congress want to know. And so we routinely provide members of Congress with information on the budget impacts of the tariffs. And the numbers that we've given most recently, earlier in June, we waited until the tariffs have stabilized. There are very high tariffs on China, and those came down, and that's the moment at which we did the analysis. Now, since then, there were actually subsequent changes, but they were much smaller. It makes it hard, but we do our best.
Are you ever wrong?
I start by saying we're human, and you just have to have a humility that we will do our best, but inevitably we will get things wrong. Back in 2009 and 2010, when President Obama was putting forward the Affordable Care Act, eventually called Obamacare,
we are done.
CBO expected that the mandate provision in that legislation would be very impactful, that the mandate on individuals and on businesses would lead to a large increase in people gaining health insurance. And it turned out that just wasn't the case. CBO looked at the experience of Massachusetts, and the Commonwealth had a mandate, and in Massachusetts, it was very impactful. But it turned out it just wasn't the case for the rest of the country. We have since gone back and evaluated what happened and published a report on the mandate, and now we've taken on board the different analysis in our healthcare projections. When we get things wrong, we need to analyze it, understand it, and adjust. I've been director for just over 6 years, since June of 2019, but I own every mistake CBO has ever made.
Errors aside, the CBO's estimates have value that stretches far beyond the Beltway. Wall Street pays close attention to what Swagle's team says about growth and deficit expectations in an effort to better understand what it all means for markets and especially bonds.
We look at their forecasts, so they tend to judge and come up with the cost of any legislation. But they give you the assumptions. They're extremely transparent. We will look at their growth assumptions, their inflation assumptions, their interest rate assumptions. So we absolutely look at the CBO number as I would say, a baseline for what the deficit will look like, what legislation is going to do to the deficit. And then we think about things that the CBO may not be incorporating by law that we would want to incorporate as we think about the impact.
It's so beautiful to see.
With President Trump's one big beautiful bill moving through Congress, CBO projections are under scrutiny.
I think the scoring, you and I have talked about it quite a bit, it's Washington-style scoring, and it's not real-world scoring.
The new CBO assumptions on the big beautiful bill, what do you think of them?
I think it looks pretty fair, and it's in line with a lot of the other estimates. Our estimate was closer to 3 trillion. You're getting 2.8 from the dynamic CBO score. We do give more weight to the dynamic score from the CBO, where they try and incorporate what would the legislation do to growth and inflation and interest rates, and they try and incorporate that sort of dynamic workings of the economy. But whether it's Joint Committee for Taxation or the Center for Responsible Budget, you're hearing these estimates of between 2.8 from the CBO, 3.5 as the estimate over the next 10 years. I would highlight, a couple of things in that. It does not incorporate tariff revenues by law. I don't think that's because the CBO decided not to incorporate it. The One Big Beautiful Bill does not have tariff revenues, but the tariff revenues come to around the same amount. But the other one is in terms of the assumption that the CBO has is of growth remaining between 1.5% and 2% over the next 10 years. And I think we have to acknowledge that business cycles happen, that you are likely to have a recession in that 10-year period. So my own estimate is that the number is likely to be a little higher. Also, CBO assumes that current law will hold. So the temporary tax cuts, it assumes by law that they will expire. I think we've seen Congress doesn't have a lot of political will to actually rein in the deficits.
That much seems to be true no matter who's in charge and no matter what the CBO has to say about it. Getting unbiased information and acting responsibly on it don't always go hand in hand.
Next, putting a price tag on citizenship, or at least residency. We take a look at President Trump's proposal to get the deficit down by selling gold cards and how similar programs have worked around the world.
Was it easy to get the pandas to come back to Washington, D.C.? Did the Chinese say, we have some extra pandas, we don't know what to do with them, we're going to give them to you?
Well, it was a little more difficult than that. It probably took us, it was about over the course of a year where we had conversations with our colleagues in China, and we were able to get pandas here very quickly. I think it's a testament to the relationship we've built over decades, to the conservation success that we've had here with our pandas and our panda program. And so it was a lot of conversations, but I think we always knew in the end that we did want pandas at the National Zoo.
How many pandas are there in the entire world?
So this is incredible because this is all due to this panda program, and this is so important. So when we started with giant pandas 50 years ago, there were fewer than 1,000 pandas in the world, right? We're talking in the wild and zoos, fewer than 1,000. And decades later, there are close to 2,000 pandas in the wild now. Actually, I think a little over 1,800. There are over 700 pandas in breeding centers. So as part of this program, we have tripled the number of pandas on the planet.
But still a small number of pandas.
Because of this program, there are more pandas on the planet, more quality panda habitat in the wild, and pandas have gone from being endangered to being vulnerable.
Get your fixed income fix. Watch Bloomberg Real Yield every Friday at 12 p.m. Eastern, right here on Bloomberg. Context changes everything.
Didn't really think I had a problem.
I would isolate, self-medicate. Like 48.5 million Americans, they didn't choose addiction. Go to shatterproof.org/findtreatment. Watch the film No More Secrets and find out how you can get help. That's shatterproof.org/findtreatment.
In case you missed it, on Bloomberg Open Interest, this data from Trump's trade war, what are you seeing in your district?
Businesses are afraid to accelerate. By and large, they're pulling over and putting on the hazards.
You're constantly speaking to businesses. Is anyone making big investments?
Inflation is a big bugaboo. There's no evidence yet that that inflation-driven drop in sentiment drops spending. That's why I say there's the disconnect on the consumer side.
Don't miss Open Interest live weekdays.
This is a story about the price of citizenship, or at least the price tag we want to put on it. For years, countries around the world have offered citizenship or residency to those willing to put up the cash. President Trump has a new proposal for the United States, and as so often with the president, it involves his favorite color.
$5 billion. For $5 billion, this could be yours. That was the first of the cards. You know what that card is?
Gold card. It's the gold card. The Trump card, gold card.
Who's the first buyer?
Me.
President Trump's proposal to create a U.S. gold card isn't really new. Since 1882, the United States has charged immigrants an admission fee for coming to the country, starting at 50 cents a person, raising it to $4 in 1907. Today, the U.S. already has a special visa program for those able to make substantial investments. Substantial as in $800,000.
The U.S. has had a golden visa program since the early 1990s. It comes in the form of EB-5, and it's been traditionally used to build big real estate projects in the U.S. So even places like Hudson Yards in New York City has been funded through this sort of program.
Kristen Surek is an assistant professor at the London School of Economics, where she has studied what is known as investment immigration. The revived push in the U.S. parallels other countries experimenting with golden visas and passports.
They're actually much more common than most people think. So if we're thinking about the golden passport program, so citizenship, there's over 20 countries with legal provisions that enable this, and there's about a dozen that regularly approve people through their programs. For thinking about the residents, the golden visa programs, they're all over the place. You can find them in just about 60 countries, 5 territories, even in places like the U.S. and half of the EU member states.
The programs vary according to how much money is required, whether it's an investment in the country and what kind of investment, or just a fee paid to the government. And, by the way, whether the immigrant only gets to reside in the country or actually becomes a citizen.
Golden passports are sometimes also known as citizenship by investment. So these are programs where you donate to a government or invest in a country, and in pretty short order, and sometimes without even ever going to the country, you become a citizen. It's a little bit different to a golden visa program, where you get not citizenship in the country, but residence in the country.
Whatever form these programs take, the goal is always the same: growing the economy of the host country. And the smaller the country, the more of a difference they can make. Investment immigration programs account for up to half of the GDP of the island nations of Dominica, St. Kitts, and St. Lucia.
So usually the idea is to bring investments into the country. Now, if we're talking about very, very small states, and usually they're the ones who are doing the citizenship programs, the amount of money that a government can bring in through these programs can be absolutely enormous. So some countries see well over 30% of GDP coming in through these programs. Now, if you're thinking about the golden visa programs where you're just getting residents, we're often talking about much bigger economies. In terms of what countries get out of it, it will be more targeted if we're looking at those investments.
But that's where the math doesn't always add up. One immigrant's investing can be one local citizen's crowding out, as in real estate. Take Spain, for example.
We've seen Spain shut its program down, Ireland shut its program down, the UK shut its program down. And if you're only approving a couple hundred, people per year, a couple hundred applications per year, is it really worth it to keep on the books, given the potential risks involved?
Spain's scramble for investment began after the European debt crisis of 2009. Since the start of its program in 2013, Spain granted more than 15,000 visas tied to real estate investment. From 2016 to 2023, the program generated $10 billion in investments, but that also helped drive up property values.
A invertir en innovación, a dinamizar nuestro tejido productivo y no para quienes simplemente buscan especular con un bien como es la vivienda.
Spain shut down its program as of April, but even as countries like Spain have cut back, others, like New Zealand, are ramping up.
We've had about 200 people apply, which is about 150 more than applied in the previous 2 years, so it's becoming more and more popular.
Stuart Nash is a former Minister of Economic Development in New Zealand and is now a principal in Nash Kelly, which works to attract high net worth individuals to the country. What are the requirements?
Yeah, so there are 2 categories. We've got the growth category, and you got to invest 5 million Kiwi, which is about 3 million US. And then we've got one called the balance category, which you've got to invest 10 million Kiwi, which again is about 6 million US. You've got to do that over 6 months. For the growth category, it's got to be in managed funds or companies. The balance category, it's a little wider. You can do bonds, you can do equities, you can also do managed funds and businesses as well. So, we really get at Nash Kelly that if you're sitting in America, you're looking at New Zealand, it looks like this oasis that you want to go to, you've read about it, Kiwis are really friendly, you know about the golf courses, you know about the environment, but you don't know much about the investment ecosystem, so it's a little bit of a risk.
When you put together your program in New Zealand, did you go to school, as it were, on some of the other programs and say, we don't want to do that, we're going to structure it this way instead?
Yeah, very much so. So, in Portugal, I think you only have to invest $200,000. It's not a lot of money. In New Zealand, we decided that, we want the people who can drive success, who have been successful. The European Court of Justice has just ruled the Malta Golden Visa illegal because it's bringing in, they think, or has the potential to bring in a whole lot of dirty money. We didn't want that in New Zealand, hence the reason why the high level of integrity to prove that the money you're investing in New Zealand has come from legitimate means. We didn't want this to be a backdoor for criminal money coming in.
The cost of granting residency to the wrong people, as Nash puts it, is just one of the things countries have to take into account in determining whether investment immigration is worth it.
There can be a lot of concerns about foreigners coming in. Xenophobic sentiments, you can find them across the world in various measures as well. So governments have to balance what they think are appropriate trade-offs in terms of how many foreigners do we want to allow in the country? Because sometimes you can have people who have a lot of money, but maybe they gained it through nefarious means, or maybe, there could be shady things in the background. So making sure that these are the people you want to let in is also a very important decision to make.
Screening out undesirable candidates for immigration may help make sure the right people are admitted and that their money is going into the right projects. But it also can get in the way, as it does for the current U.S. program, according to Alex Norasta, Vice President for Economic and Social Policy Studies at Cato Institute.
So the EB-5 is a portion of the employment-based green card in the United States. There are 10,000 of these visas set aside for EB-5 every year. What we've seen in recent years is basically about 5,000 of those are taken up by actual investors. It costs at least $800,000 or around $800,000 to make an investment in the U.S. It has to create a certain number of jobs. The EB-5 system has not worked well, and the primary reason is exactly what you said, which is it's an incredibly complicated visa. It's very burdensome to work through. So it's really suffered under this incredible burden of red tape that just keeps piling on decade after decade in the United States.
President Trump's gold card idea would cut through much of this by simply putting a price tag on admission into the country.
We don't know all the details of President Trump's gold card proposal. It hasn't been passed into law by Congress, and he doesn't have the legal authority to issue green cards based on this. But as far as we know the details, it would be selling lawful permanent residency, also known as a green card, in exchange for a $5 million fee paid to the U.S. government. This is a fee paid. This is not an investment. This is not an investment that these foreigners would get to own in the United States, but it is a straight-up fee paid to the United States government of $5 million.
If, in truth, Congress were to adopt this approach and pass legislation, so it was legal, could it make a material difference to the debt or the deficit of the United States?
It's very unlikely that selling gold cards like this would make a material large difference to the U.S. deficit or U.S. spending. For one, the price is way too high.
But Norasta does think that the president may be onto something, creating a market for U.S. admission and letting Adam Smith do the rest, something suggested some time ago by Nobel Prize-winning economist Gary Becker.
Our fiscal problems go far beyond what can be resolved by selling a gold card. However, if the price were a lot lower, if the price were, say, like $100,000 or $200,000, I think you could see a large increase in the number of wealthier immigrants coming to the United States to settle. That would produce extra economic activity here that the government could tax, and there would be a huge increase in visa fees paid to the U.S. government. So I think, ironically, the only way that we could actually make a difference in the deficit through such a scheme would be by lowering the price dramatically.
If you had total control and could design any system that you wanted, what would it look like?
I'd probably go back to the 19th century and make it just incredibly easy for people to come to the United States lawfully, so long as they aren't a criminal or a national security threat or are sick. But if I have to charge a price, if I have to have a restriction on the number of immigrants coming to the U.S., I would charge a price. I would sell visas. This is sort of economics 101. If you have scarcity of a good or service, that good or service can be efficiently allocated only through the pricing mechanism, only by charging a price, and only by allocating those visas to those who are willing to pay the price. So charging a price for a visa is a very good way to allocate them to people who really want it.
How do we make sure we get the right people in?
So what a pricing system does is it internalizes the costs and benefits of these decisions to the people who actually make them. And as a result, we're going to get a much better mix of people selected by the market economy who can do much better here in the United States than those who could be selected by Congress.
Narasta says that a market-based system could even help address the country's struggles with illegal immigration by providing a legal path.
A market-based system would undermine illegal immigration into the United States because it would give an avenue for even low-skilled immigrants like illegal immigrants to come here lawfully. Currently, what we see is that illegal immigrants pay upwards of $10,000 in smuggling fees to come to the United States, and they don't even have a guaranteed way to stay, so it's a highly risky investment. If instead those individuals could borrow money or could get loans from their family members or could otherwise save up wages in their own country, then they can buy one of these green cards, come to the United States. They don't have to come illegally. You actually have a goalpost where if they make a certain amount of money in their home country, they could afford to buy one of these visas and come here. It would really undermine the black market. It would undermine human smuggling. It would destroy those markets, and it would allow a way for even low and mid-skilled workers to be able to come here, because ultimately, it's just a price. It's just amount of money. You and I, we're not super wealthy individuals in the U.S., but we can borrow money for economic activities. I think that banking systems throughout the world, the financial institutions, would be falling over themselves, head over heels, to give loans to these individuals to buy green cards, to come to the United States, to be able to work, because the returns on them are so high. These people would be willing and able to repay them. There are enormous market and profit opportunities for them. This is something that would be a boon to the U.S. financial system, to the workers involved, and to the U.S. economy at large.
The American economy runs on immigrant labor and benefits from the fruits of globalization. In The Wealth of Nations, Adam Smith wrote that it is not from the benevolence of the butcher, the brewer, or the baker that we expect our dinner, but from their regard to their own interest. If residency in the country is the dinner, markets might set the right price for immigrants to pay. Coming up, the battle for the economic soul of New York City. We take a look at the dramatic policy prescriptions of Zohran Mamdani, the apparent winner of Tuesday's Democratic primary. That's next on Wall Street Week.
Listen carefully. Can you hear the rhythm in the markets? Not just in the syncopations triggered by inflation, but in the preludes leading to global elections, in the dissonance that moves the Nikkei, and the rising course conducted by AI. There's music in the markets, and if you want to learn to listen for it, we'll show you how.
It's a multi-trillion-dollar industry. We'll show you what's happening in ETFs like no one else. ETF IQ, Mondays on Bloomberg.
In case you missed it on Balance of Power.
Administration officials have maintained today that the objective was solely to focus on Iran's nuclear capabilities, that this objective was not regime change. But, sir, even if it wasn't the objective, could that still be the end result, and how?
I think regime change has to be the objective because the Ayatollahs are never going to give up their pursuit of nuclear weapons. They have to be forced out of power. That's the only shot we have at really lasting peace and security in the Middle East. And a strike like this, and potentially others, can disrupt the regime, can destabilize it. Look at the choice that the top military officials and key Ayatollahs now have to face after the U.S. attack. Now they have to make a choice. Do they want to take on a second military adversary in the form of the United States? They may well do it, but they would be making a big mistake from the point of view of regime survival.
Don't miss Balance of Power live every weekday.
Middle East and Africa. Vibrant resources and high-yield investment opportunities abound. Join me on Horizons Middle East and Africa for the stories, newsmakers, and insight from this exciting region. Now weekdays, only on Bloomberg.
This is a story about socialism, or at least democratic socialism, striking close to Wall Street. New Yorkers went to the polls this week to choose the Democratic nominee for mayor, which traditionally has determined who will win in November. And New York State Assemblyman Zohran Mamdani, a self-styled democratic socialist, came out the winner over former Governor Andrew Cuomo. Catherine Wild has served as president and CEO of Partnership for New York since 2011. She takes us through what Mr. Mamdani's decidedly progressive economic policies could mean.
Zohran Mamdani is a very charismatic 33-year-old young man who has been an assemblyman for less than 4 years and is somebody who, from the business community standpoint, came out of nowhere. He latched on to the issue that is the biggest one in our city and in America, which is financial insecurity. 90% of the people in New York are not sure they can continue to afford to live here. We are the most expensive city in America, the third most expensive city in the world. So there's a disconnect between the winner of New York's Democratic primary for mayor and much of the business and real estate community.
Let's talk about some of the policies. As you mentioned, tax the rich, including both income tax and I think property tax as well.
And corporate taxes.
And corporate taxes as well. A lot of free things given for the less fortunate among us. What are the likelihood that he actually will be able to implement those as opposed to just talk about them?
Mamdani's position on all these issues is more government spending, which honestly has been the position generally of Democratic candidates for a while. Right now, we're facing a situation really in New York where our economy is stronger than ever. We're a $1 trillion economy, 4.8 million jobs. We're in good shape from an economic standpoint. Our tax revenues are very strong. But there is coming down the pike some reckoning. The federal government is cutting a number of the programs we depend on. Local tax base, even as strong as New York, cannot support large federal cuts.
What we're hearing right now is this is good for Greenwich, this is good for Florida, this is good for Texas. What is the real risk that some of the mobile rich will use their mobility?
We certainly are in a much more competitive situation in New York historically than we were in the past because, again, of our high-cost environment, not just the cost of living, but the cost of doing business here. There's a 20% premium at least on salaries for employees to maintain a lifestyle in New York, as opposed to what they could achieve in Tennessee or Florida or wherever, even New Jersey. So we are in a competitive situation. We are at risk of losing business and jobs. We have our economy, fortunately, has been very innovative and has grown while we have outsource jobs to other places. Jobs, administrative jobs in the financial industry, back office jobs, have been leaving New York for 40 years. But we've replaced them with high-paying technical and other jobs. The question now is, where's the breaking point? And certainly the high tax rate is a big contributor. And I have to mention, in 2018, we lost something that was a tremendous asset for New York, which was federal deductibility of state and local taxes, known as SALT deductibility. When we lost that, everybody, all the taxpayers that really support the city, their taxes went up substantially in 2018.
Do you think what's playing out in New York City actually gives some indication of where the Democratic Party may be heading?
It's very fragmented, and so I'm not sure about the role of parties in the future of our democracy. This election was organized and driven in large part by a relatively small group of the Democratic Socialists. It's a group that I kind of trace back their power to Occupy Wall Street of almost 20 years ago. And so I think we may be going through a similar kind of transformation where we're seeing communities step up and say our traditional organizations, political or otherwise, are not doing for us what we need done. We are feeling increasingly left out any of the benefits we expect and the opportunities we expect as Americans. We're priced out of the housing market. I mean, in New York, our median rents are about $4,000 a month. Who can afford that? The employers, if you ask them, what's the hardest thing about recruiting new talent to the city? They'll say it's the rents. They can't find an apartment. So these are the issues that have been zeroed in on, particularly by all the candidates. Honestly, these were the issues in our campaign, all the candidates. But the most compelling solutions came from the socialists. And Mamdani claims, my door was knocked on in Bay Ridge, Brooklyn, which is a purple neighborhood at best. Mamdani claims to have 50,000 volunteers. The Democratic Socialists organized this. So we're not talking about a situation where he was delivered this by the Democratic Party. Quite the opposite.
Whatever Mr. Mamdani's primary victory in New York City this week ends up meaning, this is not the first time that a large city has turned to progressive policies. Harvard economist Ed Glazer has made a study of American cities over the years, and he's found structural factors that bring such policies to the fore.
I think about the sort of, the great challenge of cities is that there's a bent-in natural progressive element in cities, mostly because cities tend to attract a significant number of relatively poor people. And that's not because cities are bad for poor people. It's actually because cities are typically good for poor people, because you have better social services, because you have the ability to get around without a car for every adult. And so you have this built-in kind of progressive thing. And yet, if cities veer too much towards this sort of progressive urge, they risk inducing the firms to leave. They risk inducing the businesses to go somewhere else, to relocate, to suburbanize, to leave to a lower cost country. And of course, they induce the wealthy to want to leave as well. Because the fundamental essence of a city is geographic mobility, is the fact that this is a smaller geographic unit. It's not like the United States, where people are relatively fixed.
Has socialism ever worked? We have a candidate, Mr. Mamdani, who says he's a democratic socialist. Has socialism ever worked in any city?
I kind of think sewer socialism was pretty successful. So the key mayor is Daniel Webster Hone, who was mayor, 24-year mayor of Milwaukee, just absolutely amazing. He's one of the prime examples of what's called sewer socialism, which was incredibly pragmatic socialism, right? So this is very far away from the sort of, European coffee house kind of socialism, but it's a socialism that's determined to figure out how to provide ordinary services for poor people. He was mayor for 24 years, and he was really one of the great mayors. He was checked in perhaps his most destructive impulses by the city council, and so there were things that he wanted to do in terms of turning an electric company into a public company and so forth that he was stopped. But by and large, he was focused on the basics of city government. I think this makes a larger point, right? It's not that a mayor needs to put the interests of the rich first. But the mayor has to balance two things. But it requires a level of progressivism that's just vastly more pragmatic and vastly more focused on the nuts and bolts of government than I think most of what we see around us today.
What you identify is exactly what's being discussed in New York City right now. We have Mr. Ramdani, who is putting forward proposals for the less fortunate, things like free transportation and freezing rent and taxing the wealthy much, much more. And on the other side, you say, boy, the wealthy are mobile, and they will become mobile if you do that. Does history prove that out? Will you lose the wealthy?
The wealthy certainly are mobile. There's a healthy economics debate about how elastic the mobile are and how quickly they move out. But certainly people respond to incentives. And it seems to me that this is a maximally risky moment for New York City to be trying an experiment of hyper-taxing the hyper-rich.
From your experience, having studied cities in the United States over years, how much difference can a mayor make in the economic fortunes of a city?
Well, it's very hard to turn around a city that is suffering from enormous headwinds. And there are some times when a city is thriving so well that even the worst mayor can do little harm. But if a city is on the edge, it really matters. And I think New York City right now is not a city in which success is foreordained, and it's a city in which failure can be avoided. So I think in this case, it really does matter.
That does it for us here at Wall Street Week. I'm David Weston. See you next week for more stories of capitalism.
The top names in business are on Bloomberg.
We view the tariff situation as something that will be resolved over the next 6 to 9 months. Even if you end up with a base level of 10%, divide 10% up 3 ways, it doesn't have a huge impact on inflation in terms of global growth. It's something the world can absorb.
Nobody covers business like Bloomberg.
Welcome back to the circuit. This time, we're taking you to the frontier.
Do we have a camera, or do we? We don't want to lose you, Emily, in all of this.
Stargate. Put that name down in your books. What we're undergoing right now is sort of the largest infrastructure bill in human history.
To meet the people rewriting the rules of code and culture.
How do you personally grapple with the pace of it all?
It does feel like it's going very fast.
When did you realize, oh my gosh, my life is never going to be the same?
The day I got engaged, I was like, whoa, what have I bitten off here?
Where the future gets real.
How confident are you that AI's promise will outweigh the perils?
I'm not confident.
So the tech companies are lying or fudging.
And a little weird.
What's the point of this?
What is the point of any of this?
Tune into Season 3 of The Circuit with me, Emily Chang, Thursdays at 6 p.m. Eastern on Bloomberg Originals and Bloomberg TV.
Why do the biggest names in business choose Bloomberg Television?
That's a great question.
It's a very good question.
Interesting question. Good question.
Great question.
I so appreciate that question. You certainly ask interesting questions.
Bloomberg Television. Top experts, great questions.
In case you missed it, on The Pulse.
I think the idea of wait and see and pause is really yesterday's news. Our best advice to CEOs right now is that if you're not operating differently than you were a year ago, you may be falling behind. Yes, we need to build resilience, but we need to also build growth despite the environment, and that requires a different strategy than just a year ago.
Don't miss The Pulse, live every weekday.
On this edition of Next Africa, crypto on the continent. We look into how African nations are instituting rules to regulate the crypto industry as major international players look to expand across the region. Plus, philanthropist and businessman Mo Ibrahim on rethinking the financing framework across the continent.
Excuse me, 650 million, your budget for the African Union, 70% of that is paid by foreigners. What are you doing?
And South Africa's citrus squeeze, how the nation's biggest agricultural export is preparing for the imposition of 30% tariffs on its U.S.-bound products. Welcome to Next Africa. I'm Jennifer Zabasaja, and this month we delve into the world of crypto. Now, when you think cryptocurrency, sub-Saharan Africa doesn't naturally come to mind. The region accounts for the world's smallest share, making up just 2.7% of transactions between July of 2023 and June of 2024. But momentum is growing. When it comes to global adoption, Nigeria is second only to India. Ethiopia, Kenya, and South Africa are also major players. And while crypto trading is still illegal in most African nations and trading activities are closely monitored by central banks, some countries are passing laws to regulate crypto exchanges. And as regulation improves, appetite for crypto is growing, especially for stablecoins, which account for almost half of the region's total transaction volume. Because they track the dollar, they're becoming a popular workaround for companies stymied by currency shortages on the continent.
Stablecoins now have a market cap of around $250 billion. $5 trillion worth of transaction volumes were settled last year, estimated, and about 50% now of blockchain activity relates to stablecoins. So definitely there's significant upward momentum, and particularly in Africa, where also stablecoins now account for about 50% of blockchain activity.
Can you talk about what the volume is, though, that Yellow Card is seeing? Because your company is still about only 10 years old. What sort of pickup have you seen over the past few years?
Yeah, so a lot of pickup, right? We've processed about $6 billion worth of transaction volume in the last several years. 99%